Hi, everybody. Ed Bixby here, founder of the Global Green Burial Alliance, and I'm excited to welcome you to our first episode of Ask an Expert, our new monthly live stream series. In this series, guests have the opportunity to ask any and all questions that they may have concerning eco-friendly funeral options, whether that be what a particular option is to how to go about providing these services yourself. At the beginning of each month, I will go live either myself or with a guest, and I will discuss all topics and answer any questions the audience may have concerning eco-friendly death care. Live streams will be conducted a Q&A style with guests dropping their questions in the chat box for myself and our guests to answer. I will now open it up to the audience to leave their questions in the chat to begin the discussion. For formatting purposes, please state your name and location when you ask your question. Able to address all of those. It looks like we have a question here. What does a green burial entail? Well, a green burial is, something that is done where there is no embalming fluid, no concrete vault, no upright monuments set in concrete, no polished memorials, family participation, from start to finish, where you're able to actually participate at your own time frame. So it's a little more than just the environmental aspect of things. It has a lot to do with people being able to embrace the concept and be part of this process together, a final farewell celebration of life. Some of you may be experiencing technical difficulty. We had a glitch. I'm not quite sure. I'm getting some texts here that people aren't on. Let me just answer this real quickly. So in the future, we're going to bring on people that can answer questions about anything and everything concerning funeral services and the death and dying industry. I think it's really, really vitally important that people understand that, they have a voice in this, and they really should be able to ask and be part of the larger conversation. A grief counselor, you may have someone who sells products, and I think it's great for people to be able to be part of a larger conversation to understand exactly, what that means. So, we have Brooke from Montana, and she's asking, is embalming required in some states? So the viewers should know that embalming is not required in any of the 48 or 50 states, let's say for that matter, continental and Alaska and Hawaii. It is perfectly legal. What people don't understand is that it is the cemetery's choice to allow natural burial. It's not a state law. It's not something that they regulate. It's entirely the cemetery's decision. So I think that's really important for people to understand that, because every cemetery can allow it. And that's what's really wonderful about natural burial. We just have to make people aware that if you ask for it, then people will offer it. So we have Mike from Michigan. He's asking, are families allowed to lower the body into the grave themselves? So that would entirely be up to the cemetery staff. We allow it at our facilities. I would say that probably 90% of all natural burial facilities do allow it. I think that that's important for the families to be able to be part of that process. Some may not allow it. They may have issue with the fact that they don't want to see someone get injured or hurt possibly, during the actual process itself. But it is perfectly acceptable to allow family members to be part of that process. And if they say they don't allow it, you may want to ask, why don't you allow it, and would you allow it? And if so, what would you require of us to allow us to do so? There's a lot of different funeral options out there that are interesting people now. like aquamation, natural organic reduction. I think that, a lot of people don't understand that a lot of these options are available within states when it comes to, let's say, the pet death care industry, but it hasn't been licensed yet for human use. So what you may find is that a lot of times, let's say concerning aquamation, you'll find many facilities that offer pet aquamation, but then you won't be able to find human aquamation within that state yet. And that really comes down to the fact that that state has not licensed it yet. So it's not really something about, it not being legal. It needs to be licensed to be legal. So it's not the process, but it's just the bureaucratic process when it comes to the oversight of it. We have another question, can the families participate in the opening and closing of the graves? Well, absolutely. A lot of times what you'll find is most cemeteries will not allow the opening, because that can be a very arduous task for the families, and that could be very difficult. So some will allow it, but most of the time that portion is typically not allowed by most of the cemeteries that I know, but they absolutely, do allow them to backfill the grave. That's a large portion of what we do. Bear with me one moment. I have someone trying to get on, so I'm going to text them so that they can get the proper information. Hold on one second. First go at it. Things are going to get better in the future. So, as we learn this technology, it'll go much smoother. So we have another question here. If embalming is not required, how are the bodies prepared for a natural burial? So that's a very good question. A lot of people think that, when someone passes away, that they must immediately be buried because, if they're not embalmed, then it may be an issue. But, with technology concerning refrigeration, of course, most funeral homes do offer refrigeration. And most states, it's state law that within 48 hours, a body must be embalmed if not refrigerated for health and safety reasons. So that means that you have 48 hours. There are a few states that have 24-hour rules. I think Alabama or Arkansas might be one of them. The ones down south, it's a little hotter. That probably is a determining factor when it comes to refrigeration. But if you're going to keep someone at home, you can use dry ice. There's different techniques, and people employ these all the time. And it makes it very easy and possible to care for the loved one. And it's usually about 3 to 5 days, from start to finish when someone passes and actually have a service. So it's not 1 or 2 days. It's usually 3 or 5. And believe me, we've had it as long as 7 and 10. As long as the body is cared for correctly, it's not an issue. So that's a very good question. We have another question that's come in. Are certain states not allowed to have natural burial, or is it legal everywhere? I think I had addressed that earlier. So again, all 50 states allow it. There are no laws saying that it's not allowed. It's just a matter of the cemeteries and their rules and regulations. They need to change things to allow this. And they don't even really have to create sections. What we see very commonly now are cemeteries that are allowing this out within the regular cemetery confines and just not requiring a vault. So it makes it very easy for that to actually, be possible in any cemetery. We have a question here. Is a vault, or what is a vault, and what is its purpose? So that's a very good question. Vaults, years ago, vaults were created in the 1840s. Funny enough, to protect bodies from grave robbers. It was very common for bodies to be stolen after they were buried for medical science. The fresher the body, the more desirable for the medical field back in the mid-18th century. So to dissuade or to stop these grave robbers, they introduced the vault. And the vault was created again so they could not get in and take the individual. I think that the most important thing to understand is that vaults were to protect the bodies from being stolen, and then the message changed to it was to protect the living, so people wouldn't fall into a gravesite and things like that. But what the viewers need to understand is that a vault really is a maintenance tool. So after someone is buried, they can place the earth and reset the sod, and have more of a uniform appearance instead of having a mound, because with a natural burial you leave a mound of earth and you allow gravity to pull it down over time, and most certainly no one will fall into something that doesn't have a void or a cavity. So vaults, that is really the true reasoning behind a vault. We have someone who's asking if we can explain what a shroud is. So anyone who might not know what a natural burial shroud is, understand that it's anything that is a biodegradable fabric, paper blanket, it could be a bed sheet, it could be a handmade shroud that has handles, doesn't have handles. It could look very much like what people would imagine with like a Muslim or a Jewish burial. So a shroud just essentially is an outer burial cover, opposed to a container, opposed to like a pine box or a bamboo casket or container. So shrouds are very diverse. They can be just about anything you wish, and the families can be very creative when it comes to that. What people need to understand is that, in natural burial, the simplicity is the true essence of what we do. So there really is no rules or regulations when it comes to how creative you'd like to be. Many people create their own burial containers. I've buried many people in their favorite blankets or Afghans. It really comes down to personal choice and what people think is important to them and to the individual that they've laid to rest. So we have a question here: how can natural burials be integrated into a traditional cemetery? So that's a very good question and a very easy one to answer. So essentially, you don't have to worry about doing anything that changes the cemetery itself. The one thing that a mounded shroud, like a shroud, when you bury a shroud, a lot of the earth goes back into the gravesite itself. So you don't have much of a mound. When you have a burial container, there's a larger mound because there's a bit of a void. So we leave the earth on top so that when that collapses, it can go back in. But, in the instance that maybe, let's say in a traditional setting, family, maybe they don't like the appearance of a natural burial mound. So then at that point, the cemetery has to say to themselves that we're going to make this possible, but we're going to have to regrade it. So we're going to have to come back, several times and regrade that site and bring back the soil. So it becomes a little more maintenance issue, if you're in a traditional setting and the families are disturbed or do not want the burial mound. But within typically 6 months to a year, you might have to regrade it twice and it'll look perfectly fine. It'll go back to the way, you would expect to see it. We have a question here from Rachel. Does embalming disinfect a body? So that's a very good question. I wouldn't say that it disinfects it. I mean, essentially what it does is it preserves it. You're removing the bodily fluids and replacing it with a preservative. But, in the funeral profession, and what will be really great is like in the very near future, we're going to have a lot of experts come on here, and funeral directors who could answer that question, certainly in a better manner than myself, meaning that there are all kinds of agents and there's all kinds of natural burial products that are available out there now that can be used to clean and disinfect the body. We got a question here. I'm not sure if you have stated this yet, but is natural burial acceptable for all religions, or do some have certain restraints against the practice? I'm not religious, just curious. So it's practiced by many religions just by default. That's exactly what people are used to. Let's say in the Jewish faith, in the Muslim faith, it really feels as if this is almost an American type of tradition when it comes to traditional burials now. It's something that we have really made mainstream since the Civil War, where we brought our loved ones back from the battlefield, and then it transitioned to where the funeral professionals were, handling a lot of the affairs for the families. But in other countries, it's still a little more in touch with the way things were done, many, many years ago when families took care of their loved ones. So it really isn't tied to a religion. It's really more or less tied to, a belief system, I would say. See if we have any more questions coming in. Bear with me one moment. Let's see here. Hopefully, well, we'll give it a few more minutes to see if anyone else has any other questions. I'd like to talk a little bit about, some of the future episodes. So what we're going to do is on a monthly, we're going to advertise, Ask an Expert, and you'll have ample time to join up and be able to ask those professionals, some of the poignant questions that you may have. I do appreciate the fact that you're coming on the first one. This is a bit of a test for us. We wanted to see, how this would work on a live stream, and we wanted to be a little more available to people to kind of answer questions in a way that is a little less of a formal setting, but more something that might be on your mind. So you can come on and you can kind of ask a question that you might have been thinking about for a long time. We have a question here. What's the difference between natural organic reduction and natural burial? So that's a very good question. So, with a natural burial, someone's placed back into the earth simply as they've come from it, wrapped or in a biodegradable container, essentially recycling yourself back to the earth, but not using any kind of mechanical or human interference or assistance, let's say, when it comes to the process. You just go back to the earth, you go back into a grave site. Natural organic reduction, which is really becoming quite popular, is it's really, it's a composting system that allows the body to go back to, let's say, turned into soil in a much faster process than going back, into just a gravesite itself. But with that being said, there are a lot of things that go along with that. There's a lot of the body's placed into a chamber with organic material. It's heated, it's oxygenated, it's tumbled, and it's done for a certain period of time, and essentially over a certain period of time, typically 90 to 120 days, the body is reduced to soil. The process itself, is certainly a lot different than what a natural burial would be, meaning that it's a little more invasive. And I would love to have someone on in the future that practices natural organic reduction to be able to explain the process and answer questions concerning that, because it's definitely, I think natural burial is a gentler return, but to each his own. It's really up to the individual and what they're looking for and what their desires are. So does certain soil slow the process? Also, how long does it usually take for the body in general to decompose? So that really is entirely 100% up to soil conditions and location. So let's say, for instance, if you were to bury someone here in the Northeast, you may have some sandy soil, you may have a high water table, more humidity and temperature. And if you were to bury someone, for instance, in Arizona, it's going to be drier. The climate conditions are going to be much different than let's say, the eastern seaboard. So it could be as little as 6 months for a body to go back to the earth. Of course, the bones will remain for a long period of time. Or if you're, in a dry, arid climate, it could be many years. So it's 100%, up to the environment itself and the surroundings. How can I promote local cemeteries to offer and allow green burial? So I think the most important thing that everyone has to understand is it comes down to advocacy. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So what people have to do is they have to ask for it. And you have to understand that, cemeterians and funeral directors, they want to provide the services that their families are asking for. So they're not going to oppose it. They're actually going to endorse it. So it's really up to you. It's up to the individual. It's up to the community. If it's something that you want, you just have to make your voice heard. It's very simple. They won't ignore it. The more people who express that they would like this, the sooner you'll see it if you don't have it in your community now, because they'll hear your voice and they'll want to provide these services to you. It's really important to the funeral professionals to help our families. And I think people need to understand that they're not there opposing this. It's just they're not getting, maybe people asking for it. And when people ask for it is when when you'll see action and things will get done. Is a natural burial more affordable than a traditional burial, or are they roughly the same price? So that's a very good question. The national average for traditional burials is between $12,000 and $15,000, but you have to understand that really all depends on location. And here in the United States, people can charge what they want to charge, as we know. So the national average is between 12 and 15. I would say a natural burial falls somewhere there in the middle. I can say that the average natural burial plot typically is between $3,000 and about $3,500. But of course, depending on the location, it could be more or it could be less. And then the services of a funeral director would be probably about the same, somewhere about $3,000, maybe $3,500. So you would be somewhere in the middle, around $7,000, give or take a little bit. Again, it just really comes down to the location. So we have a question here. What are some ways we can make funerals and burials more green if we are in an area that does not have green cemeteries yet? So that's a great question. If you don't have the green cemeteries, what you want to do is you want to encourage the cemeteries that you're using to consider offering it. But if they won't, let's just say that they're not ready to make that change. There are things like inverted vaults, so you can have direct contact with the earth. So they take the vault and they actually flip it upside down so it doesn't have a lid, so that the burial container or shrouded body, can actually rest on the ground. You can choose to use a biodegradable burial container if you wish, something sustainable. You can even be shrouded. I mean, there's nothing prohibiting using natural burial products in a traditional setting or a funeral service. We can always encourage people to do things like, consider planting living memorials, maybe talking to the cemetery itself and seeing if they have space or places for the plantings of trees or shrubs, possibly instead of, cut flowers or things like that. There's always a way to green it up a little bit, and it certainly does make a difference. Again, I would say that the best thing in a traditional setting would be if they make you have a vault, ask for an inverted vault, and I see no reason why they would not allow that. So it looks like we're coming to pretty close to the end here. If we have any other questions, again, I do really appreciate everyone coming to the first one. I do appreciate you being patient. There was a couple little glitches here, and we'll only get better. I see another question. How many states is natural organic reduction legal in? Currently, to my knowledge, it's legal in 6 states, but there's many states that have it in legislation and they're looking at it, so I wouldn't be surprised if that number doubled rather quickly. It seems to be moving along. The bigger question I would have is how many facilities will actually exist. I think, for instance, natural organic reduction is available in New York State now, and I'm not quite sure that there's an actual facility operating yet. So, once these do become legalized, it'll be interesting to see how many actually start to get moving along. How does the carbon footprint of a natural organic reduction compare to a traditional cremation? That's a really good question. So, that there's no scientific studies done with that, and it would be wonderful to say that natural organic reduction, it has a lighter carbon footprint? It certainly may, but we're not entirely sure that it does. There's a lot of processes involved with natural organic reduction, from the processing of the organic matter, from the operations of the machine, the heating, the oxygenation, the cremulator, the transport. Certainly we know that flame-based cremation is not friendly, but they do have, really greatly improved technology out there now. And as some of these older facilities get shut down and they have to transition to this newer technology, the good news is that it's become incredibly green. Certainly a natural burial would be, the obvious choice if you want something with a lesser carbon footprint. But until someone does some greater studies on natural organic reduction, I'm not sure there's a claim there that it's got a lighter carbon footprint. So I think we have to see a little more done on that to make that determination. And it looks like this would probably be the last question. If you have cremated remains, what can you do with them in a green setting? So that's a great question, because a lot of people possess cremated remains of their loved ones. They may sit on a mantle, or they may be in a closet, or they may be somewhere within a home, and they say to themselves, what will I eventually do with these? And the beautiful thing about a natural burial preserve is that we offer things like Tree of Life, which means that you can take the cremated remains and mix them in the soil and plant a living memorial. And what's wonderful about that is that you're memorializing that individual. You're creating a forever place for them. And then also, you're reversing the effects of the carbon footprint, let's say, not only of the cremation itself, but the life that was lived, because the offset of that tree that's planted, may very well erase that. And the more people who plant trees and shrubs and vegetation, after cremation, we're going to be all the better for that. So again, I do appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, I apologize for some of the difficulties, but I'm looking forward to getting some great guests on here in the future. So look for our marketing saying that, who's going to be on there. Make the time, because when we get some of these experts on here, it's really going to be great to get some of these questions that I'm sure people have for, let's say, funeral directors and product providers and all of the people out there that are offering natural organic reduction, aquamation. So again, thanks so much for coming. Support the Global Green Burial Alliance. Become a pledge member. It's free. And signing off, Ed Bixby from the Global Green Burial Alliance. Thank you very much.